The curse had been elegantly cruel in its simplicity. Maintain solid form only through reciprocated love, or dissolve into sea foam at the moment of rejection. For 3 years, Nerida had sustained herself on a technicality. Loving from afar meant never hearing the words that would unmake her. She watched him from the deep pools that bordered his territory, the alpha king who ruled the northern Cloudmere pack with a combination of fierce protection and unexpected gentleness. Valdris Stormclaw moved through his world, unaware that mythical eyes tracked his every dawn run along the cliff tops, memorized the way he tilted his head when listening to his pack's concerns, catalogued each rare smile that broke across his battle-scarred features. The irony wasn't lost on her that she lived because of distance, love unrequited, but also untested, existing in that liminal space between hope and despair. Some days, when the morning light caught his silver-streaked black hair just right, she could almost convince herself that the young prince who'd saved her still lived somewhere inside the hardened king. That day, 7 years passed but preserved perfectly in her memory, played behind her eyes whenever doubt crept in. She'd been barely past her first transformation, reckless enough to swim too close to shore during the hunter's moon. The nets had been silver-threaded, burning her skin, dragging her toward a boat full of men who collected rare creatures for the southern prince's menageries. The boy who'd intervened couldn't have been more than 16, already showing the signs of his alpha heritage in his unusual height and the authority that rang through his voice when he'd ordered the hunters off his lands. He'd cut the nets himself, his hands bleeding from the silver threads, never once flinching as he worked to free her. Their eyes had met for one impossible moment. His, the color of storm clouds over the sea. Hers, the iridescent blue-green of deep waters. "Go," he'd whispered, and she had, diving deep before he could see her tail fully form, before he could realize what he'd saved wasn't human. She'd returned the next day to thank him, to reveal herself, but found only tracks in the sand. Within a week, news traveled even to the underwater courts that the young Prince Valdris had left for his mandatory fostering in the mountain holds. By the time he returned 5 years later, he was king, his father dead in the territorial wars, and she was already bound by her curse, punishment for breaking the ancient laws by falling in love with a landwalker. The sea witches had been specific in their judgment. Love a wolf, then live as humans do, sustained only by love's reciprocation, destroyed by its absence. Now, from her hidden grotto, Nerida sensed something wrong before she saw it. The pack bonds, usually humming with controlled energy around their alpha, sparked with panic. She surfaced behind a curtain of kelp, her enhanced hearing catching fragments of desperate conversation carried on the wind. "Poison beyond our healer's skill. 3 days, maybe 4. Need a miracle or we'll lose him." Her webbed fingers clutched the rocky outcropping until barnacles cut into her palms. Valdris was dying. The knowledge hit her with physical force, driving the air from her lungs. The curse pulsed inside her, feeding on her anguish, already beginning to loosen the bonds that held her form together. Without her love for him, she would simply cease, but perhaps that was the answer. The thought arrived fully formed, terrible and perfect. Her blood carried the ancient magic of the first seas, potent enough to neutralize any terrestrial poison. The old stories spoke of mermaids who'd saved princes this way, though they always ended the same way, in foam and sorrow, and princes who married others. She dove deep, swimming hard to the underwater caves where her grandmother's scrolls were kept. The text was faded but legible. A mermaid's heartblood, given freely in love, can cure any poison, heal any wound, reverse any curse save her own. The cruelest part was the word freely. She couldn't be compelled or tricked. She had to choose her dissolution. That night, as the pack gathered in desperate council, Nerida made her preparations. She wove legs for herself from moonlight and sea foam, dressed in the clothes of a traveling healer she'd saved from drowning months ago. She darkened her telltale hair with squid ink, though she could do nothing about her eyes. They remained the color of the sea, shifting between blue and green with her emotions. She appeared at the pack boundaries at dawn, when exhaustion had worn down their defenses, and desperation had opened them to impossible hope. "I can save him," she announced to the guards, her voice carrying the strange accent of one who'd learned language from books rather than conversation. "But I must see him alone." Beta Marcus, Valdris's second, looked ready to refuse until she pulled out a vial of her own blood, letting a single drop fall onto a dying plant. It bloomed instantly, explosively, flowers unfurling in seconds. They led her to him in silence. Valdris lay on his bed, his powerful frame somehow diminished, skin bearing the telltale gray tinge of wolfsbane poisoning. But something else too, something darker that even her ancient senses couldn't identify. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one a monumental effort. The pack healers had done everything they could, surrounding him with herbs and crystals, but she could feel death circling, patient and inexorable. "Leave us," she commanded with an authority borrowed from the sea itself. Even Beta Marcus obeyed. Alone with him, Nerida let her disguise slip slightly. She sat on his bed, memorizing his face properly for the first time, the scar through his left eyebrow, the laugh lines that suggested he'd once smiled more, the way his dark lashes fanned against his cheeks. "You saved me once," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. "Let me return the favor." The healing couldn't be done through touch alone. The poison was too deep. It would require a kiss, the most intimate transfer of life force, the kind that would trigger her curse's final clause. She would have perhaps minutes afterward before the transformation became irreversible. She leaned down, her lips meeting his, and poured everything into that moment. Her love, her life force, her very essence. She felt the ancient magic of her bloodline fighting the poison, overwhelming it with the power of the primordial seas. His body convulsed as the battle raged within him, and her own form began to waver, edges becoming translucent. His eyes flew open just as hers began to close. Storm gray met sea green for the second time in their lives, and she saw it, the flash of recognition, the impossible remembrance. His hand rose toward her face, but she was already dissolving, her form breaking apart like morning mist. "You," he breathed, his voice rough but alive, wonderfully alive. "The girl in the nets. You were..." But she was already gone, scattered into droplets of luminescent foam that sparkled once in the morning light before disappearing forever. Or so the curse decreed. Valdris woke to absence, not the simple absence of another person, but a hollow, aching void where something essential had been torn away. His hand clutched at empty air, fingers trying to grasp the lingering sensation of sea-green eyes that held entire oceans of sorrow and love. The foam on his lips tasted of salt and starlight. "You're awake!" Beta Marcus burst through the door, relief flooding his features. The healer's cure worked. "She said you'd recover within..." "Where is she?" Valdris sat up too quickly, the room spinning. His wolf, usually a constant presence in his mind, howled with a grief he didn't understand. "She left, Alpha, immediately after healing you. We tried to stop her, to thank her, to pay her, but she simply vanished. One moment she was walking toward the shore. The next..." Marcus frowned. It was strangest thing. There was only sea foam where she'd stood. The words hit Valdris like physical blows. Sea foam. The girl in the nets. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. How had he not recognized them immediately? But no, that was impossible. The girl from 7 years ago had been human, hadn't she? Memory reassembled itself in fragments. The way she'd moved in the water, too graceful to be drowning. The nets that had been designed for something larger than fish. The hunters who'd spoken of catching a prize for the Southern Lord's collections. The way she'd looked at him, ancient and young simultaneously, grateful and sad, as if she knew something he didn't. "Bring me Elder Moira," he commanded, his voice cutting through Marcus's continued relief. Now. The pack's oldest member arrived within minutes, her centuries of life evident in her clouded eyes that saw far more than they should. She took one look at him, at the faint iridescent sheen that still clung to his skin where lips had touched his, and sighed deeply. "So, the sea has finally collected its debt," she murmured. "Explain." The alpha command in his voice would have brought lesser wolves to their knees, but Moira simply settled into a chair, her bones creaking like old ship timbers. "You truly didn't know what you saved that day?" She studied him with those unsettling eyes. "Your father did. He smelled the sea magic on you when you returned. Saw how you kept returning to those pools. Why do you think he sent you away so suddenly?" The truth unraveled like a net being pulled from the water. His father had known, had deliberately separated them, had died before explaining why. She was a mermaid. The words felt impossible on his tongue. "The girl I saved was a mermaid." "Is," Moira corrected. Was. The tense becomes complicated with curses. She pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The old treaties between land and sea spoke of such things. A mermaid who loves a landwalker can sustain herself only through reciprocated love. Unrequited, she returns to foam. But Valdres stopped, the full weight of realization crushing him. He'd never told her, never sought her out, never even allowed himself to fully remember her face, filing the memory away as a boy's fantasy, too painful and sweet to examine closely. I never knew she existed beyond that day, and yet she loved you enough to die for you. Moira's voice held no judgment, only infinite sadness. Her blood, given in true love's sacrifice, was the only thing that could have saved you from the modified wolfsbane. Someone wanted you dead badly enough to hire a sea witch for that poison. Ironic that they provided the very circumstance for a sea creature to save you. Valdres was already standing, his body moving before his mind caught up. There has to be a way. The old magics, the treaties you spoke of, there has to be a way to bring her back. From death? From a curse fulfilled? Moira laughed, but it was hollow. Even the moon goddess herself couldn't. Then I'll find something older than the moon goddess. The determination in his voice silenced her. This was not the rage of fresh grief, but something far more dangerous. The calm certainty of an alpha who'd found his purpose. Over the following weeks, Valdres transformed from ruler to seeker. He emptied his father's hidden library, discovering texts he'd been forbidden to read as a young prince. He learned about the first waters, the primordial seas that existed before the earth knew land. He read about the deepest courts, where creatures older than wolves or humans held sway. He found references to bargains made and unmade, to laws written in coral and blood. His pack grew restless. An alpha who didn't eat, who barely slept, who spent his nights standing waist-deep in the sea calling out in languages that predated words. Such an alpha made them nervous. Marcus tried to reason with him. She's gone, Valdres. Even if she was what you say she was, she chose her path. She saved you. Honor that by living. Valdres turned on his beta with eyes gone wild with sleepless determination. She saved me because she loved me. She died because I never told her I loved her back. I failed her not once, but twice. As a boy who let her swim away without a word, and as a man who couldn't recognize his own heart when she kissed me goodbye. The pack needs an alpha who deserves to lead them. What honor is there in accepting a sacrifice I could have prevented with 3 simple words? He found his answer in a text so old it had to be read underwater, its ink visible only beneath the waves. The Treaty of Tears, written when the first wolf learned to walk upright, and the first mermaid grew lungs alongside gills. There was a clause, hidden in subsections of subsections, about love that transcended death. The one who would reclaim a sea-claimed soul must offer equivalent exchange. A wolf may walk beneath waves, only if his love proves deeper than the Marianas Trench, older than the first tide, stronger than the pull of the moon. The ritual required 3 things: the crystallized heart of the lost one, for even foam left traces in the deep places, the willing abandonment of one's own nature, and the consent of the deepest court, the entities that existed in the trenches where light had never reached. Finding her heart was the easiest part. He dove without equipment, his wolf's lungs adapting through sheer will, following the pull of his own grief downward. It rested in a coral grove that had grown overnight, fed by her dissolution, a crystal the size of his fist that pulsed with bioluminescent light. When he touched it, he heard her voice in the current. Let me go. But Valdres Stormclaw, Alpha King of the Northern Cloudmere Pack, had never learned how to let go of what he loved. His father had tried to teach him by forcing separation. The mountain holds had tried to teach him by showing him strength without attachment. Even his wolf, usually savage in its straightforward desires, had tried to teach him by howling for 7 years at pools where a memory lived. He'd failed every lesson. Now, holding her crystallized heart against his chest, feeling it sink with his own heartbeat, he prepared for his greatest failure yet, failing to accept the natural order of things. The deepest court awaited. The ancient powers that had written the first curses would hear his plea, and if they demanded his wolf, his crown, his very humanity as payment, he'd already made his choice. The moment her lips touched his, and he'd tasted eternity, he'd known. Some loves were worth drowning for. The descent beckoned. Marcus found him at the cliff's edge at moonrise, dressed in ceremonial robes that predated their pack's founding, holding the crystal heart that now glowed steadily as a lighthouse. "If I don't return, you'll return," Marcus interrupted. "Both of you will. Or the sea will have to deal with an entire pack of wolves learning to breathe underwater." Valdris almost smiled. Then he dove, following her heart's light down into the places where even stories feared to tread, where the bargains that shaped the world waited to be challenged by a wolf who just discovered he'd rather drown as himself than breathe without her. The deepest court existed in a place where water became something else entirely, thick as honey, dark as void, pregnant with the weight of every secret ever drowned. Valdris descended for 3 days, or perhaps 3 minutes, or perhaps 3 centuries. Time meant nothing in the trenches where the first waters still remembered being born from cosmic ice. Her crystallized heart was his only light, pulsing steadier as he went deeper, as if it recognized home. When he finally reached the court, he understood why even the sea witches spoke of it in whispers. The entities here had no form that his wolf mind could fully grasp. They were pressure given consciousness, darkness given hunger, the space between heartbeats given eternity to contemplate existence. They were older than the distinction between land and sea, older than the first time love had looked at itself and recognized separation. A wolf comes to the deep places. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in languages that predated sound. How novel, how presumptuous. Valdris held out the crystal heart. Its light seemed both defiant and fragile in the absolute darkness. "I come to claim what was lost. Nothing is lost here. Everything simply returns to what it always was. Foam to foam, water to water, love to grief. Then I offer exchange." The words came out steady, though his lungs shouldn't have been able to form them under this pressure. "My nature for hers. Let me walk beneath waves if she can walk above them. Take my wolf and give her back her form." The laughter that followed made the water itself shiver. "You think your wolf is payment enough for a curse fulfilled?" She chose dissolution. She completed her arc. The story ended. "Stories don't end," Valdris said, remembering something Nerida had whispered in his fever dreams. "They only pause between tellings." Silence. Then, movement in the darkness, something vast and serpentine, or perhaps made of nothing but consciousness refusing shape. "Show us, then. Show us this love you claim is worth rewriting the laws themselves." The ritual began without warning. The crystallized heart pulled from his hands, floating in the center of what might have been a chamber, or might have been the universe's first womb. It began to spin, faster and faster, its light fracturing into impossible colors. Then he heard her voice, not remembered but real, echoing from the crystal. "Don't. Please, Valdris, don't. Let me remain as foam. At least as foam, I'm free." "Free?" He spoke to the heart, to her, to the watching darkness. "You call loving me from afar for 7 years freedom? You call dying for a curse you never deserved freedom?" The crystal pulsed. "I chose it. Every moment, I chose it. Then choose again. Choose me. Choose us. Choose the impossible." "The impossible has a price," the deepest court interjected. "Show her what you're willing to pay." The transformation started immediately. His wolf, the part of him that had defined him since birth, began to tear away. But it didn't leave cleanly. It fought, ripping through his consciousness like claws through silk. Every alpha instinct, every predatory certainty, every claim to dominance shredded away, leaving him gasping. "Stop!" Nerida's voice cracked with panic. "Not his wolf. That's who he is." "No," Valdris growled through the agony. "It's what I am. Who I am is the boy who cut silver nets until his hands bled. Who I am is the man who stands in tide pools calling for a ghost. Who I am is yours." The transformation accelerated. His bones began to reshape, not into the sleek form of a sea creature, but into something unprecedented, something that belonged neither fully to land nor sea. Scales erupted along his spine, but they were silver black like his fur had been. Gills split his throat, but his lungs remained, doubled, tripled, adapted for impossibility. The deepest court recoiled. "This is not the exchange. This is not the law." "Then I propose a new law," Valdris said, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the water itself listen. "Love doesn't choose between forms. It transforms." The crystal heart shattered. But instead of disappearing, each shard began to grow, spreading like frozen lightning through the darkness. Where the light touched, memories bloomed. Not just Nerida's, but his, theirs. The story told from both sides simultaneously. A young prince cutting nets, not knowing he was cutting his own heart free. A young mermaid swimming away, already knowing she'd never truly leave. Years of watching from pools, memorizing the way sorrow carved itself into his features. Years of running along cliff tops, his wolf howling at something he couldn't name. The kiss that was hello and goodbye and everything between. Enough, the deepest court roared. But there was something different in their tone now. Fear, wonder. You're unmaking things that should not be unmade. Good, Valdris said, reaching for the reformed crystal that now pulsed with 2 heartbeats instead of 1. Some things deserve to be unmade. The darkness cracked. Light, not from the crystal but from somewhere else, somewhere that had never existed before, began to seep through. It wasn't the gentle light of the surface or the bioluminescent glow of the deep. It was the light of between, of neither, of both. In that light, Nerida began to form. Not all at once. First came her voice, clearer now. This is impossible. Yes, Valdris agreed, his new form moving through the water with predatory grace that belonged to no creature that had ever existed. Beautifully impossible. Then came her outline, sketched in phosphorescence and starlight. Her face, those eyes that were every shade of the sea at once. Her hair that moved like kelp in invisible currents. But something was different. She wasn't fully mermaid or fully human. Like him, she was becoming something new. The laws, the deepest court whispered. And now it was definitely fear in their voice. You're rewriting the laws themselves. This cannot be permitted. The separation between land and sea exists for a reason. The curses maintain balance. The sacrifices maintain order. Then we'll maintain something better, Nerida said, her form solidifying enough to reach for Valdris. When their hands touched, the water around them turned to something like liquid starlight. We'll maintain the spaces between. You don't understand the consequences. The court pressed, their forms writhing in ancient distress. If you exist as neither and both, you'll belong nowhere. No pack will claim a wolf who swims. No pod will claim a mermaid who runs. You'll be forever boundary walkers, threshold guardians, belonging only to the spaces others fear to tread. Valdris pulled Nerida closer, their transformed bodies fitting together in ways that should have been impossible. Scale and fur, gill and lung, ocean and earth. We'll belong to each other. And to those who need passage between worlds, Nerida added, understanding flooding her features. That's what we're becoming, isn't it? Not land or sea, but bridge. The deepest court stilled. In their endless existence, they'd seen everything except this. Love that didn't choose sides but created new territory. If we allow this, they said slowly, you become responsible for maintaining what you create. Every soul caught between worlds becomes your charge. Every love that refuses its boundaries becomes your ward. You'll never know peace, only the constant pull of those who need crossing. Like she needed crossing when she watched from the pools, Valdris said. Like I needed crossing when I ran the cliffs. We've been practicing for this our whole lives. Nerida turned to face the court fully, her form now complete but flickering between states. Sometimes scaled, sometimes skinned, sometimes both, sometimes neither. We accept. We haven't told you the final price. Does it matter? Valdris asked. We've already paid everything we thought we were. Whatever's left you can have. The laughter that followed was different this time, almost respectful. The final price is this. You must return to the surface and convince both your peoples that you have the right to exist. If either the pack or the pod reject your new nature, you both dissolve. Not into foam, but into nothing. Complete erasure. Not even love will remember you existed. Nerida and Valdris looked at each other, seeing themselves reflected in forms that shouldn't exist. He was a wolf who could breathe water. She was a mermaid who had grown legs that didn't disappear. They were impossible. When has that ever stopped us? She asked. He kissed her then. Their first kiss where both were conscious. Both were choosing. Both were becoming. The water around them turned to aurora, spreading upward through the layers of sea, carrying news of change to every creature that swam or sank or dreamed of drowning. They rose together, hand in hand, their ascent taking neither 3 days nor 3 minutes, nor 3 centuries, but exactly as long as necessary for the ocean to recognize what they'd become. Fish scattered and returned, curious. Whales sang harmonies that had never existed, celebrating or mourning the change. Even the sharks, ancient and pragmatic, gave them space, recognizing apex predators of a different sort. When they broke the surface, the moon was full, and the pack was waiting on the shore. Marcus stood at the water's edge, his eyes wide with wonder and horror at what his alpha had become. Behind him, the pack shifted nervously, their wolves recognizing and not recognizing the scent. From the sea, drawn by the disturbance in the ancient laws, came the pods, mermaids and mermen rising to witness the impossible. Among them, the sea witches who had cursed Nerida, their faces unreadable as stone. "You return," the eldest witch said. "But as what?" "As ourselves," Nerida replied, her voice carrying both the howl of wolves and the song of whales. "As something new." "Abomination," someone from the pack whispered. "Evolution," Marcus countered, stepping into the water despite his wolf's instinctive fear. "If our alpha chooses this, there's a reason. Your alpha chose to abandon you for a fantasy," another wolf called out. "No," Valdris said, his voice still commanding despite everything that had changed. "I chose to expand what we are, to prove that the boundaries we've always accepted aren't walls but doorways." He demonstrated then, diving beneath the waves and emerging with pearls that had never seen sunlight, placing them at his pack's feet. Nerida ran onto the beach, her new legs carrying her with inhuman grace, leaving footprints that bloomed with sea anemones. "We don't ask you to follow," she addressed both groups. "We ask you to let us exist, to let us be the bridge for those who need crossing, your lost pups who are drawn to water, our young who dream of land, the loves that shouldn't be but are. And if we refuse?" The eldest sea witch's question hung like a blade. "Then we disappear," Valdris said simply. "Completely. But you'll always wonder what might have been possible if you'd chosen courage over convention." The silence stretched, taut as a held breath. Everything balanced on this moment. Not just their existence, but the possibility of change itself. Then a young mermaid, barely past her first transformation, swam closer. "My sister loved a human once. She became foam rather than live without him. If you existed then, could she have—" "Yes," Nerida said gently. "That's exactly what we're for." One by one, others began to speak. Wolves who'd lost pack members to the sea's call. Mermaids whose hearts had broken on the shore. Stories of love that had chosen death over separation, not knowing there could be another way. Marcus was the first to kneel, not in submission, but in recognition. "The Northern Cloudmere Pack acknowledges the evolution of our alpha. We will learn this new way." The eldest sea witch sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 1,000 years. The deep pods recognize the validity of this transformation. "The curse is not broken. It is transformed into something else. You are now cursed to forever hold the threshold, to never fully rest in one world or another." "We know," Nerida and Valdris said in unison. As the moon reached its zenith, the two groups, pack and pod, did something unprecedented. They mingled at the water's edge, sharing stories, comparing mythologies, realizing how many loves had been lost to the artificial divide between their worlds. Valdris and Nerida stood between them all, their joined hands creating a bridge of bioluminescent light that stretched from sand to sea. They were the first, but watching the wonder in young eyes from both species, they knew they wouldn't be the last. "So what now?" Nerida asked, her sea-green eyes reflecting his storm-gray ones. "Now we become what we always were," Valdris replied. "The space between heartbeats, the pause between stories, the impossible made inevitable." They dove together, running and swimming simultaneously, their forms shifting with each movement. Wolf and wave, fin and fur, howl and song. Behind them, the world began to change. One impossible love at a time. The curse had become a calling. The sacrifice had become salvation. And in the spaces between what was and what could be, they carved out a new existence that belonged to neither tradition nor law, but to the wild possibility of love itself.